Hey everybody, this is your old buddy Dr. Mark Jesinoski. This is the Wizard Podcast, Wednesday, April 22nd. It's hot today. It's hot and sticky here in Fallbrook, California. But I'm having one of those days I wanted to just share what is on my mind in this present moment. And when I started this podcast last fall, last September, something I set out to do was just to be really spontaneous and honest with what's happening in the moment, and to not make this about, coming in here with bullet points and coming in here with some sort of a lesson plan or some sort of exact thing that I want to talk about. Because for me, this is not about lecturing at you, and for anybody that listens to this, this is not something I want you to feel like you're coming to a classroom and I'm just giving you a presentation. What I'm really doing is I'm just honestly sharing where my mind is in the moment. And my hope is, my intention is that by being really honest about what's happening in my mind and my perception in my life and my journey, maybe you'll resonate with that. Maybe you'll relate to that. Maybe there's a nugget or two in there that you can relate to that will really help you in your own journey. And I think there's a lot of benefit by just being really transparent and honest with ourselves in the moment, and allowing that to guide how we think and how we feel and how we act and how we relate to others. So today I wanted to talk about specifically masculine and feminine energy. And if that's something you've never really considered or contemplated and you're like, huh? Then hang in there and just kind of give it a listen. If that's something you find yourself you're really savvy with, or you have a good sense of that, you're really articulate with it, there's a lot of you that listen to this that probably know a lot more about that than I do, or you're much more articulate about it, or you just have a better grasp on it than I do. So I'm just speaking about it from my particular place in life, my particular place of understanding. And as usual, there's a whole bunch of different topics that I want to weave together. But I wanted to just start by at least saying that I've been thinking a lot about masculine and feminine energy, and I've been noticing a lot of how that story plays out within my own body and my own life, but also how that story plays out on a micro and macro level. In other words, how energy becomes thoughts, how energy becomes emotion, how energy becomes ideas, and how that translates into collective thinking. We have the collective mind, so to speak, the collective unconscious, the collective conscious. All of us, we have to understand, when you're pointing the finger, I think all of us probably spend time right now looking at social media, and you look at people doing things and they're pointing the finger, and those idiots are doing this and these idiots are doing that, and I'm much righter than they are, and I have a better, more clear perspective than someone else. Just understand that we're all trying to make sense of our present time and space, and we all are putting judgments upon our experiences, because judgments help us to make sense of what we're experiencing. Judgments and language allow us, basically we wrap language around experience, and that allows us to contextualize it and make sense of it. But today specifically, if I can wrap my wandering mind around this particular idea without going too far off, I just want to talk about energy, and specifically masculine and feminine energy. Now, as a bit of a preface, and anyone that's listened over time, you understand I kind of weave together the metaphysical side of this, and I realize there's many different people from many different backgrounds that listen. And this isn't about me tiptoeing around someone's perspective or someone's worldview. It's much more about speaking in a way that is relatable, and speaking in a way that we can understand, essentially the foundation of what I'm talking about. So when I talk about energy, I could easily be talking about God. And I don't think it needs to be offensive to someone who wants to use the word God or wants to speak about Christ or wants to speak about any other religious perspective, it doesn't have to, don't need to be offended or put off by my use of the word energy. Because if we did go down that rabbit hole, we pretty quickly get into that space. If we start contemplating God, we start using our human mind to try to contemplate God and what God means and what God is, well, we have to start asking questions like, where is God? And is God inside of me? Is God in nature? Is God in all things? Is God truly omniscient and omnipresent and omnipotent? All-knowing, all-seeing, or all basically everywhere at the same time, knowing everything and all-powerful. Well, if there is an energetic resonance that transcends all things, I would say that would kind of be God. And I would say if that energetic resonance actually has a consciousness to it, if there's an intent behind it, if there's a certain flow behind it, well, that sounds kind of like God to me. So I just want to kind of establish that as a foundation that, if I talk about energy, I could easily be talking about God. And I think that when we get beneath the layers of bondage or attachment or wrapping language around experience, we can see God from this perspective, and you can feel that energy. You can feel that divine within, inside of you. And anyone, as I mentioned last week, anyone that's dedicated their life to the stillness knows that God is within you, knows that divine space within. And when we clear the thoughts and we clear the bondage and when we clear the story, and how could I put that in simpler terms? When we learn to quiet our mind and we learn to listen to and observe the sensations of the body without judgment, without reaction, without automatically assuming that our thoughts and our feelings are correct and that we should automatically act them out, when we're able to slow down and quiet the mind and observe the sensations of the mind and body, you start to realize that beneath it all, it seems to be about energy. It seems to be about a flow of energy. And a client I was just talking to today, and I do have his permission to talk about this kind of vaguely, we were talking about masculine and feminine energy in his own life. And he was struggling with certain thoughts, and these thoughts would be put in the category of like obsessive compulsive thinking. And these thoughts are very disturbing to him. And it's something we've been talking about and working on for quite a long time. And he's been on this journey of becoming, this journey of growing, this journey of learning. And today, I essentially asked him, what kind of situations lead to him having these kinds of thoughts? What kind of experiences? What we essentially got to is that these thoughts emerge in situations that require him to display masculine energy. So let me back up a little bit. What is masculine and feminine energy? Masculine energy would be looked at as energy that is required to set firm boundaries, energy that is required to stand your ground, to stand firm. It's kind of the warrior energy, you could say. You notice I'm careful with language because we all have our attachments to language, and that language is attached to emotions, and pretty soon you say the wrong word and someone is so far off to the races in their own biases that we lose attention. So masculine energy is about borders and boundaries and strength and control, and there is healthy masculine energy and there is unhealthy masculine energy. Some people say toxic masculine energy. On the other side of that, you have feminine energy. Feminine energy is about nurturing, it's about caretaking, it's about collaboration, it's about working together. And likewise, you can have toxic feminism and you can have very healthy feminism. So in this particular fella's life, we were talking about the fact that throughout his childhood, throughout his life, he has always felt much more comfortable. He was probably nurtured into feminine energy, meaning he deals with conflict in much more of a through much more of a feminine approach, meaning he doesn't want to engage in conflict, he doesn't want to engage in negativity, he doesn't want to have to set firm boundaries. But what he's learned over time is that, and what we really talked about today is that as these thoughts emerge in his mind, what's truly happening is he's feeling this masculine energy beneath the surface that is arising because he needs to stand up to someone, or he needs to set a boundary with someone. He needs to stand his ground. And because he did not spend his childhood or his life becoming acquainted with healthy masculine energy makes him feel anxious. The pure feeling in the body is what we would think of as anxiety. Anxiety is just a word, remember that. So what is the sensation? What is the energy? It's an energy in the body, and that energy is arising to protect. That energy is arising to stand our ground. It's arising to be strong. Except that energy makes him feel anxious, and that energy turns into thoughts, and those thoughts are obsessive thoughts. Obsessive thoughts about stuff that makes him feel uncomfortable. When we really decipher that story, it's really, I feel this masculine energy in my body, and what that means is I need to stand my ground. I need to set a boundary. I need to engage in a sort of, not combat, but a sort of conflict with someone. And I'm pausing because there's so many different directions we could go with this today. I'll just talk about myself for a second. Something that I became aware of by working with combat veterans, in particular by becoming really close friends with a pretty good community of combat veterans, is that and this is like a whole lot of life experience rolled into a very, small nutshell here, that during my childhood, I learned to compensate with conflict through feminine energy. And to be fair, I think that it's kind of my natural way of being, to be empathic, to be loving, to be kind, to be, I've always, as a lot of people will say in my field, like I've always been the person that helps people with their problems. I've always been the one that talks with people. And anybody that knows me growing up, or anybody that knew me in college, even if I was a party animal or an idiot at times, I was always the one talking to someone in the corner about their problems, I remember once, this is probably too much information. If my mom's listening, she'll cringe, but I was at a bachelor party once just after college, and of course there was a stripper there, and guess who ended up talking to the stripper about her problems toward the end of the night while she was crying? So, that was just a role that I played, and it was just something I naturally gravitated toward, was being a helper, a healer, a caregiver, a supporter. But part of that was that for a number of reasons, I became avoidant of masculine energy. I became avoidant of conflict. Conflict meant anxiety in my body. Conflict meant anxiety in my body. And as a child, when you don't have language to wrap around experience, what do? You avoid. We tend to avoid things that make us uncomfortable. It's a natural response. So in my own journey, I learned to become very, very good at navigating that feminine energy. That's not something I could have talked about at any time until recent history. But that was something that it served me well, it served others well, and it also kept me safe. Now, what's interesting is in getting to know a lot of combat veterans and in working with a lot of males and females, men and women, remember, masculine feminine energy is not about male female per se. It's In fact, it doesn't really necessarily have to be gender specific. I've worked with women who are extremely masculine, and I've worked with men who are extremely feminine. I think it does come down to how were we injured as children, and how did we compensate for those injuries. So, working with a lot of combat veterans, and this is just a particular group I'm very familiar with, a lot of those guys compensated very early in life through masculine energy. So they became tougher, they became harder, they became, it's my way or the highway. And indeed, that served them well. It kept them safe. So they learned that masculine energy was a really good way to keep themselves safe. If you think of bullies in school, for example, bullies tend to compensate through masculine energy. It's a toxic masculinity. You have to remember there's healthy and toxic masculinity and femininity. So a lot of these combat veterans I worked with were really good warriors because they were really comfortable in that masculine energy. What's interesting is, before I jump to that, what's interesting is feeling feminine energy for these men, mostly men that I worked with. Feeling feminine energy made them feel anxious. The idea of being touchy-feely, the idea of feeling feelings, the idea of having to navigate those emotions actually is quite uncomfortable. I spoke with someone today actually that kind of fell in that category of, coping through masculine energy. In other words, constantly having to wrap a reason, constantly needing to fix, constantly needing to problem solve, constantly needing a mission. And if you can have a mission and parameters for that mission, you can execute that mission, everything is neat and tight, and you can focus on that and you can conquer. What happens when you can't do that? What happens when healing requires us to be more flexible, to open up, to slow down, to listen to our emotions, to be more nurturing, to be more compassionate? Well, now we have to venture into that feminine energy. So I realize in my journey that, and I'll just talk, I won't talk specifically, but my journey with my friend Justin, who I've mentioned a fair amount, Justin was very, very good at navigating his masculine energy, but was very challenged in navigating his feminine energy. Conversely, I was very good at navigating my feminine energy, but not as good in navigating my masculine energy. So I healed as much from him as he healed from me. In other words, I learned where my injuries were, and I learned, and I'm still in that process of really understanding where my injuries were in my masculine energy, and he learned where his injuries were in his feminine energy. So if you're someone who had a loud, overbearing parent, if you're someone who was yelled at a lot, if you're someone who was punished a lot, if you're someone who everything you did was wrong, you never felt right, you could never do it right, well, then you probably had toxic masculine energy being put upon you. In other words, whoever was kind of the aggressor in your life, and keep in mind, definitely keep in mind empathy for those people, because those people were also taught by the same dynamic. It's generational trauma. We pass down our trauma from generation to generation. But if you had someone who was loud, overbearing, mean, angry, cranky, you found yourself tiptoeing around all the time, then you were probably dealing with a broken or a toxic masculine energy. Right? Likewise, if you were someone who is overly coddled, who was kept too safe, who was protected too much, who wasn't allowed to experience danger, who wasn't allowed to experience your boundaries, who wasn't allowed to test your limits, well, then you probably experienced a toxic form of femininity, feminine energy. Now, you can quickly extrapolate this kind of dynamic from individuals to a culture. So it doesn't escape any of us that, people like to point the finger at millennials, and I don't like it at all, because it's a complete lack of taking responsibility by the generations of people that created that in the first place. So shame on you idiots for talking negatively about large groups of people without taking full responsibility for why these things exist. But the point is, our country, our culture in general has, and of course there's nuances to this, and this is an area I should probably be really, really careful, but I'm not going to be, because then I'm going to miss the point. We have both toxic masculinity and toxic femininity running this country. Just give you a moment to pause and step back and kind of think about what that means. On one side, you have a dynamic where it's divide and conquer, take what you want, whoever's the strongest wins. If you're stronger or you can dominate someone else, hey, so be it. If we need to let some people die to save the economy, hey, so be it. Right? So toxic masculinity is this idea that as long as I can be stronger than, as long as I can dominate, as long as I can yell louder, throw more insults, as long as I can make you shrink, I'm in charge. Conversely, toxic femininity is everybody needs to be perfectly equal. If you say the wrong thing, if you slip up and say the wrong thing, if you do the wrong thing, basically the idea that everyone needs to be treated exactly the same, and if they're not treated exactly the same, we will punish you, right? So essentially what I'm talking about is far left fascism and far right fascism. They're both forms of fascism. What they're really driven by is toxic masculine or toxic feminine energy. And I'll revisit this in other podcasts and things like that, but for a lot of you, I bet this is kind of an introduction to like, oh, so if you look at politics, look at what's happening in our country. You have extremes taking place. You have this extreme right and this extreme left, and that is toxic masculinity. It's injury on the left and it's injury on the right. Let's look at it from a more empathic perspective. It's injury on the left and it's injury on the right. Some people compensate in one way, some people compensate in the other way. What we need to understand is far left and far right fascism is a profoundly deep generational trauma playing itself out and being exploited by the ruling class, so to speak. What does healthy masculinity look like? Healthy masculinity looks like telling the truth and taking full responsibility for who you are. It's taking full responsibility for your actions, right? It's not lying to an entire country and manipulating people and using and abusing people and pitting people against each other and separating people. It's learning how to be strong in your beliefs, how to be strong in your faith, how to be clear-minded, but doing that in a very honest way, understanding if you're wrong, to take full ownership of being wrong, and being willing to change your mind in accordance with good information. Broken masculinity is wrapping reality around your perspective. Broken toxic masculinity is warping reality around your perspective because you're so afraid of change. You're so afraid of that feminine energy. You're so afraid of having to adapt. So really toxic masculinity looks like narcissism. It's a good way to look at it. It's basically saying, I'm going to wrap reality around my perspective, and anybody that doesn't fit that, I'm going to punish and harm and hurt. Doesn't matter if it's real, doesn't matter if it's truth, doesn't matter if it's honest. I'm just going to punish anybody that doesn't fall in line with my perspective. That sounds like far-right fascism. That sounds like toxic masculinity. That sounds like narcissism. It sounds like a big part of the problem of what we see happening in our culture today. There's a lot of toxic masculinity out there, which means there's a lot of broken people who have been assaulted by someone else who is pushing toxic masculinity on them. It all comes from a place of injury. It all comes from generational trauma. The other side is that, again, just kind of keep going back and forth. Toxic feminism, toxic femininity, right? It's taking, ironically, it's, even though it's about, promoting diversity in its healthy form, it's about honoring diversity. It's about, think about it in a tribal sense. It's about honoring the unique gifts of all people. It's about honoring each individual's creativity and what they bring to the table, and the fact that different cultures and different perspectives are a good thing. That's healthy feminism. Feminism, as a movement, is supposed to be about healthy equality. Healthy, strong on the word healthy. Honoring differences, honoring diversity. But toxic femininity, toxic feminism is about saying, if you don't use the right words, if you don't honor diversity, we are going to punish you, basically. In other words, ironically, if you have a unique individual point of view, and that unique individual point of view goes against the way that we perceive things should be, we will punish you for it. In fact, we'll get militant about it. You want to lick your thumb and stick it in the air and test the wind of politics and morality. Just understand that when people say, either you need to listen to my point of view or I'm going to harm you, you're just getting into the realm of fascism there. It's not healthy. So I don't want to keep going on this for too long today. In some ways, I just wanted to get this out of my brain and just almost introduce this as a topic. I know I've talked about it before a little bit. So I'll just kind of summarize and end with, energy is beneath it all. If you're struggling with a thought, if you're struggling with an emotion, try to unravel that story from an energetic point of view. What is the energy beneath it? What is the energy beneath it? There are times in life where we need to utilize masculine energy to be strong, to be firm, to be clear, to set boundaries, in particular to set boundaries with people that don't set boundaries for themselves, people that would harm us or hurt us. So there is a healthy form of masculinity. And a healthy form of masculinity is telling the truth and taking full responsibility. That's basically what Jordan Peterson and a whole bunch of other people throughout history have talked about. It's being fully honest with yourself. Can you be fully honest with yourself? And can you take full responsibility? And on the feminine side, can you learn that compassion, nurturing, collaboration, working together is also important? You ever hear people that, as soon as people start talking about, let's work together, what do? On the toxic masculine side, that's socialism. It's socialism. You're commie. You want to be a commie? No, it's actually got tribal roots. It's a tribal thing to work together, to be collaborative. It's healthy feminism, right? On the other side, right, you always hear the other side, the far left side, which is the broken feminism. It's throwing judgments on people that want to stand their ground as individuals. If you try to stand your ground, it's any form of masculine energy is perceived as a threat by the far left. And I would love for someone that knows more than this stuff to contact me and talk about it and debate about it. We can talk about it as much as you want. So I just wanted to stumble through this a little bit today. I know there's a whole bunch of different places I could go. There's a whole bunch of different dynamics. I just wanted to bring up the idea and the issue that energy is beneath it. It's the yin and the yang. It's the Shakti and the Shiva. It's the masculine and the feminine. Masculine-feminine balance is unbelievably important for emotional and psychological and spiritual health within the individual, Masculine and feminine balance is incredibly important for a healthy nation of people, for a healthy group of people, whether it's a community, a tribe, a state, a country, whatever. We are an incredibly injured human species. We're an injured country. We've allowed ourselves to fall into toxic masculinity and toxic femininity. We need healing. We need healing, and we need to stop allowing ourselves to be exploited by a ruling class that doesn't care about our deepest needs. There's toxic masculinity and toxic femininity at the ruling class level. We call them Republicans and Democrats on the extremes. So I've probably opened up a lot more questions today than I've provided answers, and that's okay. I just want to leave it at that. Notice the energy beneath it all within yourself. Understand that profound, deep energy within you is not just confined to your body. It transcends your body. It's something that connects us all. It connects us all, not just to each other, but to all things. For some, it's what we call God. Thanks for stumbling around with me today, everyone. This is Dr. Mark Jesinoski. This is the Wizard Podcast. Take care.